absolutely fine places to be in your process right now. So we'll go ahead and get started. We will introduce ourselves, and then we'll see how long this presentation takes and save some time at the end for any questions that you all have. My name's Jack Bittner. I use he, him pronouns. I'm an assistant dean of admissions at Carleton. I've been at Carleton for a little over a year down in Northfield, but I've worked at a few different institutions. Before that, I was in the admissions office at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington, and yes, it's a fun name to say, but I, across both of those institutions, have seen slightly different rates of selectivity, and we'll get into that a little bit more in the presentation. I also graduated from another selective liberal arts college, Colorado College, so I've really traversed the Western liberal arts colleges. And while I haven't worked at or attended a bigger state school or an R1 institution or a research university, we'll be speaking a little bit more broadly about selectivity and then kind of get into it. So it's not liberal arts specific, even though I am.
I'm Aaron Percy. I am our AP and IB coordinator. I'm just here to kind of support Jack, and if there are any questions that come up that I can answer that might be specific to this process, I'm happy to help, but Jack's got the lead on this and I just get to run the camera and help out. So good to see everyone.
Yeah, thank you guys for picking this session first. We'll be doing it 2 more times after this if you want to stick around. But yeah, we'll be talking a little bit about selectivity, intentionality, and finding a college home. And ideally, the way I've structured this kind of guides you from one piece to another, getting away from the selectivity piece that you hear so much about in the news media, in I think much of the conversation that revolves around college admissions. So we'll start by putting the college search in context, what that means and how it's gotten as inflated as it is in our culture, and certainly for you seniors, I can only imagine how all-encompassing it feels right now, and as a part of both your academic and social networks. We'll talk a little bit about the problem of selectivity in the college admissions process, and then ideally get to a point where we're redefining selectivity as intentionality. So to put the college search in context, you'll often hear this phrase thrown around, and I think it's not that frequently defined. Come on in. But it's not just one thing, it's kind of 3 different things at once, all with very different angles. First, obviously, it's a rite of passage for many students who seek post-secondary education. As you have a counseling team here at school, it's frequently kind of dramatized in movies and in TV. There is this emphasis that you are at point A right now, in senior year of high school, and college is point B. That does not necessarily have to be the case. That is not the only narrative. That is not the narrative I want to push. But broadly, I think that is something that we've adopted, certainly for students who are looking for a higher education. Second, it's also a bottomless pit of consumer options. There are maybe 50 to 100 schools that get most of the attention when it comes to selectivity and that are defined as highly selective institutions. Then there's that Princeton review list of 400 top colleges, and ultimately you have a few thousand post-secondary options in the United States. That's probably a lot more than you hear about, and those range from community colleges to regional or regionally serving institutions to some of the larger state universities, research universities, liberal arts colleges, Ivies, that sort of thing. And then finally, it's a gateway to an advanced degree. As we've seen our economy expand, sometimes a bachelor's degree isn't the thing that you need to do the job that you want to do, and this bachelor's degree is point B, but there might be point C and point D afterwards, and getting your bachelor's degree is an essential part of that journey. But it's littered with incomplete or incorrect insights. in which you hear a lot of different people speculating, many of whom are not involved in the process, but they feel they can confidently go out and say what it is, which can often lead to some fairly harmful, incorrect insights that may misguide you throughout the process. And hopefully we demystify that a little throughout this presentation. And then it's just magnified to a greater degree when you're dealing with these selective institutions. I feel like the pandemic, honestly, was a really good example of this, in that you had so many different research institutions studying the science of the pandemic, but every headline I read was about the researchers at Harvard have discovered this one thing, and they're not the only ones. They're not the only dog in the game, but they're getting so much of the attention, and that just can lead to incorrect comparisons, ultimately, when you're looking at a bunch of different schools. So, to define selectivity a little further, it doesn't necessarily have a set definition, and there are some inconsistencies throughout that we'll look at it, but it pertains to the amount of students we ultimately admit. So the percentage who are admitted divided by the percentage who apply is ultimately how most institutions get to their admit rate, though institutions can define an application in many different ways too, where some institutions will say, when you've submitted the Common App and you've submitted all of your materials, that's an application. Some schools might say, you submitted this interest form, that's actually an application, and they will use that to inflate their numbers and seem more selective than they actually are. But for the sake of this, and just kind of draw it broadly accepted, you can see that 25% of fewer students as an admit rate is going to qualify you as highly selective. 25 to 50% is going to be generally selective, and then upwards of 50%, you'll see kind of less selective, with 90% or more getting closer to an open enrollment, where you are needing to more just meet a set of state set standards in order to be admitted into a specific institution. There are very few highly selective institutions, but they get all the media attention, and I would say even within highly selective, there's a 1% of the 1% situation where you have maybe 20 schools that are admitting less than 10% of students getting into those single digits, but those schools are occupying so much of the oxygen in the room. To further complicate this, I'll note that selectivity in our broader college search is often equated with the quality of an institution. That is not true. Let's just throw that thought out the window right now. It's not the only path to finding college success, and many types of institutions are selective. State schools, research universities, private liberal arts colleges all have varying degrees of selectivity, but you also may find varying degrees within the same institution. For example, an honors college within a broader university, admission to the honors college might be really competitive, whereas getting into the university system as a whole may not be. And so how do you balance those two things when ultimately you're talking about the same school? I'll also just say it says next to nothing about the quality of individual programs or undergraduate experience. So again, I want to distance selectivity from the value that an institution offers to you as the person who's making the decision and who has the agency in this process. One of the best ways in my mind to see this is go to a university's website and see where those faculty members got their undergrad degrees. Most of them, I would say, come from a random array of institutions across the country, because maybe studying geology in the middle of a city at an Ivy League institution isn't the right place to do that. Maybe doing it in the rural western United States is going to offer you incredible opportunities, incredible research opportunities. And so, again, don't equate selectivity with what an individual program can offer. And an overall acceptance rate too isn't going to reveal nuances in selectivity. We can take Carleton as an example. This past year, Carleton admitted across the board 16% of all applicants, but that's not going to be the chances of admission for every single applicant, because that is a flattening of many different rounds. It's our early decision rounds, it's our regular decision round, it's domestic students, it's international students, all of whom have different kind of chances of getting in, and those different factors are going to be weighed differently, and so we arrive at this single number, 16%, but that's really only going to tell you the total number of students admitted out of the total number of students who applied, nothing more. A few more problems with selectivity. It's variable for so many reasons, like I just mentioned. So institutions might want to grow enrollment from specific geographies. They may need to bolster a team or a program. Some institutions may be committed to having a specific enrollment number across different majors or maintaining strong athletic teams. There might be financial need sensitivity, a need to balance the budget. Additionally, institutions might be looking for gender balance. They'll be paying attention to yield, so how likely a student is to ultimately enroll after they've been admitted, or the popularity with a specific field or discipline. At Carleton, we can't admit all the students who want to be pre-med students, because we also need a strong humanities department, but we see way more applications from students who say, I want to do pre-med. And then again, that application round where admit rates are going to vary alone between these rounds. Early action, early decision, regular decision. This can be maddening to students, but there are ways to get through it. Please just avoid rumors about selectivity. I would pay attention to college websites specifically, talk to your counselors, and just understand selectivity isn't a virtue and it is not a measure of quality. So, to redefine selectivity as intentionality, you need to successfully navigate what selectivity means while also setting yourself up for success in your college search. So, identify colleges based on programs, based on the cost and value, and be skeptical of pricing that is too good to be true. You want to certainly pick an institution that is a good financial fit for your family. Think too about personality. Fit is often how this is defined. How happy would you be at an institution when you go and you tour? Do you feel like you connect with the students you're seeing and you can see yourself there? Think about location as well, and that's all to say, don't start with things like the brand, the selectivity, or rankings. These are all kind of misnomers throughout the process that can really cloud your vision and end up with you attending an institution where you may not be your happiest self. All that said, please understand too that there are many different institutions where you will be successful. There is not just one institution. I think in our process too, and with more selective institutions, students often talk about like a gut feeling and they just connect with a specific institution. And know that, I say this to students looking at Carleton, you'd likely be just as successful at many of our peer institutions across the country. And yeah, as I just mentioned, you are always welcome to ask colleges, what are your peer institutions? Because if you like that one college, there are good chances that you're going to like some of their peers across the country. So, if you fall in love with a highly selective college, just know that numbers alone won't be sufficient. So this is where we're kind of transitioning from selectivity to thinking about your intentionality as an applicant. You need to make a case for admission. You need to pursue interests because you enjoy them, not because they look good. Trust me, we can tell and see it on an application when you're just doing something to put it on your resume, but there is little connection elsewhere. And recognize too that this is in so many ways a numbers game, and just because you do everything right may not result in admission to a specific institution. you should not be banking all of your hopes on one institution, or certainly you should not only be looking at highly selective institutions, just because there are so many fluctuating factors within these institutions. Your counselors are an amazing resource. They can speak to this specifically, and certainly as you're building your college list, you should be referencing them to make sure that you have a nice balance and you're setting yourself up for success when it comes to the spring of your senior year. We're also really going to look in applications for authenticity. It's a marker of a good application, and when we are, ultimately picking 1 out of every 10 applications where the numbers all look good, authenticity is key. It comes from really active reflection, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen when you sit down and write your college essay and you're like, you know what, I did it, first draft, I'm done. You need to really sit on this and understand how to bring yourself forward through your writing, through your extracurriculars. This is where we're getting to know you. It aligns your interests and beliefs and really connects them more broadly to self-expression. Not easy to achieve, but it can be really powerful. It can often function as a through line in an application that makes it really easy to advocate for a specific student because they come through very clearly. Parents and guardians, you can help in this because you're trusted, but understand you're not a peer. You can listen when students are willing to share, and you can watch people gain confidence. You can be a sort of mirror to your students as they work on this active reflection. So if reflection leads to authenticity, authenticity leads towards intention. And this is telling a college what you want, understanding what it is you are looking for in your college experience, and telling us that we meet those standards. It can be really helpful, and it might seem totally obvious, but you'd be surprised how many students don't bring this into their application. I'm not saying you need to write it in your essay, but understand that there are other places throughout college applications where you can make it very clear why a specific school is going to be right for you, and that's also thinking about how you've identified your fit. So this is really defining what your terms are. Your college research shouldn't be random. It needs to be guided by needs. If you're a note taker or a processor with a pen and paper, do that. Write that out. If you're a verbal processor, talk that out with someone. Don't let them just exist up here in your mind without actually making them real. Essays also aren't pop quizzes. They're very well-groomed diary entries. So again, looking for that reflection as opposed to just regurgitation. And interviews, while not required, can be really good field research. They're your opportunity to often connect with someone like me or a current student and get a real sense of how people at the institution talk about the institution. That can really help get at that sense of fit in highly selective institutions. Students don't just write what they think on the application, they write what they feel, because that's who they are. I really want to stress that point, that we are looking for a sense of personality, and that's how to make an application feel really intentional in selective admissions. So, to wrap up, strong applications are going to give us a window to your intention, and they can really shine in selective admissions. They are smart, they are planned, personal, coherent, and they're fun to read. We really enjoy getting to know our students, and again, it is easiest for us to get to know them when they are authentic, and it is easiest for us to advocate for them when they have made a case for why our institution is the right place for them. So, best of luck. These are muddied waters, and again, there is a lot of misinformation that flies around and can be highly publicized, but I don't want that to cloud your search, and I don't want that to ultimately set you up for anything but success in your own college search. So with that, we have a moment for any questions that y'all have. I don't claim to be a complete expert on all institutions, but again, have kind of a range of experience, again, across differently selective institutions, and that has been really something I've enjoyed about my job. So do you all have questions? Yeah.
I wasn't sure if this was appropriate for this, but I don't see anywhere else on here that it might be, but when you talk about authenticity, and one thing that has always, I haven't understood, a lot of essays ask the student, what can you do, not what are you bringing, but what are you bringing to our school, but what can you do for the school while you're here, that kind of thing. And how does a student that, beyond just reading about the school, or what would be some examples just in general? Like, I can still kind of wonder, what would I have written? So I wonder about, like, for a 17-year-old, how am I supposed to know what I'm going to do for the schools, and aren't I here to learn?
Yeah.
Have the school do something for me, but what is that question about?
Totally, it's a really good question, and I think it gets at a misconception in the process that, what you are bringing to an institution can depend on any number of the things that I mentioned, like, let me go back quickly. Like, any of these things, I think, are sometimes what people think about when they're like, well, what do I bring to an institution, especially if there are clear goals within an admissions framework for who we need to recruit. And that it can be identity-based frequently. I wanna push away from that idea, because I don't think it's entirely correct. I had a conversation with a student I was recruiting down in Texas earlier this week, and she was talking about like starting an organization at her high school, not something that's huge, not something that has, defined her life or her career, but she was someone who demonstrated some of that like self-starter energy and saw a need and filled it. That is a specific type of characteristic, but again, spelling out kind of those characteristics through some reflection can help us understand who you're going to be. I often like to tell students it is undervalued, the fact of being an active participant and a supportive peer. If you're going to be that person who shows up for every friend's athletic event or musical or theatrical performance, tell us about that. It doesn't necessarily have to cast you as the hero. I think oftentimes essays can get towards that hero mentality. I've got to have a journey. I've got to defeat the bad guy at the end. But to give us a sense of who you are in a community is really going to help us understand how are you going to contribute to the institution. And it doesn't have to be, I'm going to be class president, because we only have one class president, but we're just as excited about all of our other students, currently on campus.
One quick question.
Yeah.
The ACT with selectives, are they, I know everyone's, no, we're not taking them anymore, but are selectives still really taking them?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yes, depending. I look at specific institutions' policies. I guess can only speak to Carleton and saying when we don't see a test score, we're not like, there's not a test score, they must have gotten a bad result on the ACT or the SAT. That does not factor in, but I can't say that about all institutions. And I do think it is the responsibility of the institution to be a little bit clearer about this. I don't think as a field we do a great job of being transparent about how this plays into our process. That being said, I have heard about more institutions starting to require them again. Maybe not for this fall, but for future years. Carleton actually hasn't decided if we're going to require them again. We've only decided through this fall that we will be test optional. And some schools, you can absolutely ask about this, may use testing to determine things like merit scholarships. And so it's worth considering that even if they are a test optional institution.
do you know how they're calculating the average score? Because if they're optional, the higher scores are gonna be submitted, so your average is higher.
Absolutely.
And it just, well, I mean, it's like
Excuse
defeating
it.
for kids, right? Like to,
Totally.
our average is, 33, and you're like,
Yeah, no, I
of course it is,
100%
because
agree with
everyone
what
from
you're saying.
32 to 36.
yeah, Carleton's middle 50% currently is a
Yeah.
31 to a
Right.
34.
Right.
It is astounding, I can't wrap my head around it.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, it's worth noting the way that this change has inflated or skewed the data if
Yeah.
students who, if the only students who are submitting testing are the ones who feel like they've done a really good job, it's going to look like the only
Yeah.
students who are admitted to the college are the only ones who got a really good test score. That is not the case. A little less than half of the students who were admitted to our class last year applied test optional. That said, a strong test score can be an asset, but it's not, for us, it's not the make or break decision.
Thank you
Yeah, I
all.
wish I could
Clearly
provide
the next
clearer,
group's coming.
clearer